Modern day Westerners pay the highest tax rates in terms of total taxes that you actually pay in probably the history of the world. And taxes are going to get higher, not lower, as we move closer and closer to Western collapse. And if for some reason you think you don't pay a lot of taxes as a Westerner, you can check out the blog article that I put in the description of this video, where I analyze the typical average American. The typical average American pays anywhere from 51 to 70% of his total income in some form of tax. That includes taxes he sees and a shitload of taxes that he doesn't see. Canada, Western Europe, Australia, these places are not much better. As a matter of fact, in many of these regions, you're actually paying more taxes than an American. My God. We talk a lot here about having to save money on taxes at Sovereign CEO, but why is it that you're paying so much money in tax? Why is that? It's a very simple reason. It's two words. It's called big government. It is something that everyone likes. Left-wingers like it, modern-day right-wingers like it, Trump supporters like it, nationalists like it, socialists like it, communists like it, corporatists like it, monetarists like it. Everyone likes it. They all like different versions, and they all argue about which versions are the best, but they all like big government. None of these ideologies are actually for a much smaller government. None of them. But Caleb, what about libertarians? Libertarians have no power in the world and never will. Real, actual libertarians are less than 1% of the actual political electorate in the Western world. And I'm being very generous by saying 1%. As a matter of fact, the last few libertarians who existed in the United States were converted into big government nationalist Trump supporters around 2016. Alex Jones, Vox Day, Stefan Molyneux, these people all started out as small government libertarians and today are big government nationalist quasi-Trumpers. Now, it's important to understand, at least in my opinion, what the types of big government are today, because they're not the types you were taught when you went to grammar school. When you went to grammar school, you were taught three types of governments, right? You were taught capitalism, socialism, and communism. I would submit to you that none of those three types of isms actually exist in the real world today. None of them. Point to one truly capitalist country in the 2020s. There isn't any. Point to one truly socialist or truly communist country in the 2020s. Yeah, there are none. So these three isms, communism, socialism, capitalism, are really just philosophical fun concepts that don't exist in the real world. In this video, I'm going to give you the actual real three types of big governments there are actually in the world, so that you are aware of them, and when you're making your decisions in terms of where to live, where to move to, how to internationalize your lifestyle, you can be more educated as to the types of these governments. I say these are three types of big governments because, again, the concept of small government really doesn't exist in the world today, unfortunately. And if you think it does, that's great. Name me 5 countries that have really tiny governments as a percentage of their populations. Yes, you can find small island nations with really small governments, but on a per capita basis or as a percentage of population basis, even those places generally have larger governments. Big government is a worldwide norm today, so I'm covering the 3 types of big governments that actually exist in the real world, not in your grammar school textbook. The first type of big government that exists in the world today is what I call the chaotic government. This would be places like Panama, Colombia, Italy. These are big bureaucratic governments that are very disorganized. They have all kinds of problems. They do very little right. They are extremely corrupt. They waste massive amounts of money. And they're basically just clusterfucks. And they basically take their taxpayers' dollars and they blow it out the window with all kinds of corruption and bribery and chaos and things that don't work and all kinds of weird policies. There are lots of these types of governments, certainly in the emerging markets. And many of these governments, surprisingly, have higher tax rates. Colombia, for example, is not a country you would expect to have high tax rates or really ridiculous tax laws, but it does, unfortunately. So despite the fact that I like Colombia as a flag, you have to be very careful if you move to Colombia because of its tax laws and tax rates. And by the way, I was saying this well before they elected their socialist or quote unquote socialist president. And if you want more detail on that, you can watch that video right up there. The problem with chaotic governments is that they don't work very well and they cost a lot of money. The good side about chaotic governments, if there is one, is that they don't enforce a lot of their stuff. And this is why I've talked about how you can move from the Western world to a country with a more chaotic government and actually experience more day-to-day individual freedom, even though the country on the overall is considered less free because the government is more corrupt. As I've said many times, the typical average American, if he were to move to Mexico, even though Mexico is a less free country ostensibly than America, that American would still encounter more personal day-to-day freedom in his life, because when you have a chaotic government, generally speaking, there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, the government doesn't mess with you unless you mess with it. This is opposed to Western governments where the government is always messing with you, even if you're doing everything perfectly right. The second type of big government in the modern era is the corporatist government. This is exemplified by the modern day versions of the United States and Japan. Corporatism means that you have big giant government and big giant corporations linked together like this, running the country and screwing the populace. In these types of environments, you have massively, massively high taxes. You have massive income disparities between rich and poor. Yet, unlike the socialist countries, you don't get a lot of benefits for your taxes. I've spoken with many Americans who have moved abroad, and they have told me the reason they moved abroad is, hey, it's not that we're paying a lot of money in taxes, it's that we don't get anything for it. I mean, hey, the Scandinavians get raped on their taxes too, but at least they get stuff for it. They get a bunch of free shit. Now, it's low quality free shit, but they get something. We Americans pay shitloads of money in taxes, and we get virtually nothing. That's corporatism. Corporatism involves a lot of bank bailouts, a lot of money printing, a lot of corporate bailouts, and a lot of bullshit that is completely unfair and off the chart corrupt. And unfortunately, if you live in a corporatist country like the United States, you're going to be paying an absolute shitload amount of money in taxes you see and taxes you don't see. And during any economic collapse, much of which is caused by the corporatist government or corporatist corporations, the government will bail out the big corporations and big banks that caused the problem, but they won't bail you out. In other words, corporatism is the least fair of all government models. And I have said on the record several times in my blogs, if you put a gun to my head and you forced me to live in either a corporatist country or a socialist country, I would live in a socialist country. Now, I'd hate it. I'm an anarchist libertarian. I hate all forms of big government. I can't stand any of this stuff. But at least with socialism, you do get some benefits for the high taxes that you're paying, whereas with corporatism, you get nothing. You just get screwed. The final form of big government in the modern day world is the welfare state, exemplified by Western Europe, although Western Europe certainly isn't the only offender here. The welfare state is a concept where the government spends billions, if not trillions of dollars, giving this to people who don't want to work. And when I say don't want to work, that's what I mean. I am not talking here about someone who loses their job, they go on some form of government assistance or unemployment for a few weeks, and they go right back to getting a job. No, in a welfare state like Western Europe, and unfortunately the United States, because there's aspects of that as well there, the welfare state will have people who are on welfare, or whatever is the welfare equivalent. There's all kinds of different names for these things. These are people who are unemployed for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years or more. They're not even trying to find a job, but they continue to get paid by the government. In other words, they continue to get paid by you, the taxpayer. As you might expect, this is ridiculously and extraordinarily expensive, which means you as a taxpayer are going to be paying a lot of money in taxes. And what's hilarious is that you'll have welfare state countries attack corporatist countries and say, you evil corporatist countries, you're raping your taxpayers and you're ripping off your taxpayers. We certainly aren't. In us welfare states, we're paying people to not work for years and years and years and years and years. It's just you idiot corporatists over there. And that's kind of the bottom line here, is that what is the good kind of big government in terms of these three types? There is none. They're all terrible. They're all evil. They're all unfair. They're all bullshit. And in my opinion, you shouldn't tolerate any of them. Now, I'm going to address one objection that I think might be coming. You might be saying, or might be thinking, but Caleb, you live in the United Arab Emirates. You live in Dubai. That's an authoritarian country. I have an entire video coming up on that exact topic in about a week or two. Stay tuned for that. But my country where I live does not fall into any of these three big government categories. Why? Because what are my tax rates in my country? 0. I pay no taxes legally. There's no income tax where I live. There's no income tax, no corporate tax, no property taxes unless you buy commercial real estate, which I won't, no capital gains tax. There is no income tax here. How could the country in which I live in be a gigantic, gigantic, gigantic government when it doesn't have any taxes other than a very small sales tax? Please explain that. Now, yes, my government does own things like banks and sovereign wealth funds and things like that. That is very true. Accurate. But it's none of the three categories I talk about. It is not a chaotic government. It is not a welfare state. There is no welfare state in Dubai. Sorry. If you are poor, you have to leave the country. Oh, darn. And it is not a corporatist country. Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Hewlett-Packard have no power here. They cannot tell the government what to do, and the government's not going to bail them out. As always, is Dubai perfect? No. Is the UAE perfect? No. But at least I live in a place where I can experience more personal day-to-day freedom and a lot less money in taxes because I don't live in a country that has a gigantic bloated government in terms of the size of the population. This is also why I say that small countries tend to be much better than big countries. The biggest problem, one of the biggest problems actually with the West, is that they're all full of these gigantic countries like the UK and Germany and France, the United States and Australia. These are big, giant countries with millions upon millions upon millions of people. Smaller countries have less odds of having gigantic, bloated governments. So the next time you're paying your big tax bill to your big, giant, bloated, Western, corporatist, welfare state, or chaotic government, I suggest you remember this video and you might want to think about maybe making a change like I did so you don't have to pay these absolutely ridiculous taxes that goes to your big, stupid, corrupt government. I will see you in the next video. Bye.